tonight's primetime, we'll have new information on the HDTVX report due out tomorrow into the tragic deaths of babies at Portlaoise Hospital.
And I'll be reporting from Gaza on efforts to rebuild after last year's war.
And I'm here in Belfast, where at 10 o'clock an exit poll will give us the first real indication of how people have voted in the Westminster election.
Hello and welcome to the programme. We will be going to London and Belfast at 10 o'clock for the results of that exit poll that's being taken right across Britain. But first, in January last year, RT's Investigations Unit reported on a number of deaths of babies at the maternity unit in the Midland Regional Hospital, Portlaoise. The report sparked widespread condemnation. A review by the Chief Medical Officer deemed the maternity unit unsafe, and the health regulatory body HDTVX was requested to assess patient safety at the hospital. In recent weeks, a very bitter and very public row developed when the HSE disputed aspects of HDTVX's draft report. But tomorrow, HDTVX will eventually publish its final report. Aoife Hegarty of our Investigations Unit joins us now with the latest. Aoife, what can you tell us about this report?
Well, we now know, David, that HDTVX will publish its report tomorrow morning. That's after a year after it started its work. Now, while HDTVX itself has declined to public on the content of that report prior to its publication, we believe the report will be published at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, it's quite a lengthy report. It runs in excess of 200 pages long. And as you referenced there, this report has been at the centre of a very heated and public row between HDTVX and the HSE, with the HSE at one stage threatening legal action to prevent its publication. But it's our understanding that the report that will be published tomorrow, that its substance is not changed and that its core findings are essentially the same despite the reported criticism from the HSE. It's thought the findings will be extremely critical of the failure of governance and leadership across the HSE, and that's at local, regional and national level over a number of years. And as we'll see now in this report, what happened in Portlaoise had devastating consequences. Tomorrow morning, the Midlands will wake up to find their local hospital in Portlaoise in the news again with the publication of HDTVX's report. RTE understands the report will strongly criticise the HSE for failing to adequately act to reduce risks identified at the hospital over many years. So what do we know? Serious alarms were going off over a 7-year period at the hospital, where there was a cluster of baby deaths and investigations identifying repeated care failings. In 2006, 31 of the hospital's midwives wrote to then Minister for Finance Brian Cowan, alerting him to the crisis situation at the hospital, stating they had a real fear that a mother or baby will die in their care. In November 2006, Sharon McCarthy's baby suffered serious brain damage during labour. Baby Caitlin died the following year. On the 2nd of August, another baby, Nathan, died days after suffering major brain damage during labour. The following year, a HSE investigation into baby Caitlin's death found failures in her care, and recommendations were made to address them. But the same failings continued to resurface. 4 months later, Shauna Keys went into labour. Her baby Joshua died shortly after birth. Less than 2 years later, the HSE completed a report into baby Nathan's death, and baby Joshua's hospital report followed 3 months later. Both found similar failings to those previously identified. Just over 2 months later, in January 2012, Roisin Malloy went into labour. Within minutes of his birth, baby Mark died. A review of his care was carried out in the hospital days after his death. Once again, many of the same care failings were identified. Yet almost a year and a half later, a fifth baby, Mary Kate, died after Amy Delahunt was wrongly discharged from Portlaoise Hospital. 4 months later, in September 2013, the Malloy family received the full HSE report into the death of baby Mark. It identified similar care failings and recommendations to those first identified in 2009 when baby Caitlin's report was published. But it doesn't end there. There was another critical warning before all of these baby deaths occurred, and that came from the State Claims Agency, a state body external to both the HSE and hospital. We know the State Claims Agency had concerns about the hospital as far back as 2006. Tonight, we can reveal the extent of those concerns. In a statement to the Investigations Unit, the agency said it was aware of a pattern of under-reporting of adverse events at the Midland Regional Hospital in Portlaoise and undertook a series of actions in 2006. According to the statement, the agency was not satisfied with the responses received from the hospital, and it escalated its efforts to address issues at the hospital, as well as meeting with senior management and the HSE, and requested that a review be conducted, either by the agency on its own or jointly with the hospital and HSE. A spokesperson for the State Claims Agency told RTE Tonight that the HSE refused the agency's request for an external review, with the HSE saying it was carrying out its own audit. The HSE statement said it engaged extensively with the State Claims Agency, and it was decided at a meeting in December 2007 by mutual agreement that a full audit was not necessary. But tonight the State Claims Agency said it did not accept that, and it had requested the HSE to provide the outcome of its own audit process, but the HSE failed to do so. When HICWA publishes its report tomorrow, all eyes will fall once again on Portlaoise and on the HSE and the failure to protect patients, even after risks were identified, and whether or not the deaths of babies could have been prevented.
Aoife Hegarty's still with us. Aoife, can you tell us any more about what's going to be in the report?
Well, during the course of their work, we know HICWA were in touch with 83 families in total. Now, those families came from various sources. Some of them were sent through the Chief Medical Officer after he did his own report, which was quite damning last year. Others came from the likes of the HSE, Patient Focus, and some approached HICWA directly themselves after our own investigation. HICWA met and interviewed 16 of those families, and we understand that tomorrow's report will cover the 5 deaths that we featured in our original investigations. Now, the report is expected to contain in excess of 250 adverse findings, and it'll be critical of individual members of HSE management, and those people are at various levels within the organisation. Now, we understand the report will focus on repeated failures and non-compliance in standards of care by the hospital and the HSE.
And this revelation that the State Claims Agency was looking for an audit as far back as 2006, given what we know about what happened after that, what more can you tell us about that?
Well, in a statement to us tonight, the HSE that they say that they have a lot of interaction with the State Claims Agency and that they have a very constructive relationship with it. But it says that, as you heard there in the report, that following a meeting between both parties in December 2007, it was agreed by mutual agreement that there would be no need for a full audit of the maternity services in Portlaoise as it was conducting its own internal report. But now, tonight, the State Claims Agency is disputing that fact because it says there were conditions attached and there was only to be no full audit of the maternity services if it was satisfactory, if it felt that an internal report being conducted by the HSE was satisfactory. But tonight, the State Claims Agency is saying to us that it has never seen sight of that internal review.
OK, Aoife Hegarty of RT's Investigations Unit, thanks for joining us, and more on that obviously tomorrow. Now, last year, Hamas and Israel fought a 50-day war in the Gaza Strip. It was the third conflict in 6 years and the deadliest. The UN estimates that on the Israeli side, 67 soldiers and 4 civilians, including a 3-year-old child, were killed. On the Palestinian side, over 2,200 people were killed, including over 1,500 civilians, of whom 551 were children. Now, many are warning that tensions are rising once again, as Robert Short reports.
War is no stranger to Gaza. Today it lingers in the rubble of last summer's conflict. 100,000 people remain homeless. Many live literally in ruins. Hopelessness, impatience and anger threaten a fragile ceasefire. Many now fear the ghost of war will return.
The frustration will break. I don't know when and how, but it is going to break. There will be outbreak of rage and anger in Gaza soon.
This is Mara Hosso. She's 10. In her short life, she has seen 3 wars. Last July, Mara, her 10 siblings, father and mother, then heavily pregnant, fled the bombing of their home to find shelter in this UN school. Over 1,000 people are still crammed into the classrooms of Zaytun Elementary. 7 such centres were attacked by Israeli forces during the war, causing 44 deaths and 227 injuries. UNRWA, the UN agency responsible for Palestinian refugees, is caught in the crossfire of conflict and the desperate needs of thousands.
Water issues, power, the growing population, the lack of housing. All of these things indeed make Gaza potentially unlivable by 2020 if we don't make a change.
€4 million of Irish aid funds will help UNRWA's work this year. But billions promised by international donors hasn't materialised. Add to that the ongoing Israeli blockade, and Gaza is stuck in a stark stalemate that threatens a humanitarian crisis.
There are no jobs. People can't provide food for their families, and this is why we have such a dependency on assistance. We feed over 868,000 refugees today. It was 86,000 or something like that just over 10 years ago. So the dramatic increase is the blockade, a direct impact of the blockade.
Israel imposed a blockade on Gaza after a violent split between Palestinians in 2007. Hamas has ruled Gaza since. Israel accuses it of continuing to use cement and steel to rebuild tunnels to launch attacks into its territory.
Look, I can say we are still under the occupation. Palestine is not free. Gaza is not free. West Bank is not free. And it's our right to fight against the occupation. We cannot just keep silent and close our eyes and say, okay, we don't hide the fact that we want to protect ourselves. We want to take precautions in order to prevent any possible aggression against our people. But we gave promises that all the building materials will come to Gaza and go to people who need it. Hamas will not interfere. If Israel continues in such a policy against Gaza, you have to expect anything.
Rebuilding after a war is a huge task. Rebuilding after 3 wars in 6 years is a monumental task. Add to that a blockade and a temporary ceasefire, and it's leading to frustration and a simmering sense of anger, which is stretching the hope of a return to any sort of normal life here in Gaza to its limits.
But the blockade goes deeper. Gazans cannot travel freely across their borders. Dr. Mona El Farah was prevented from travelling to Ireland in March to speak at a conference.
They have told me security reasons. I think, actually I'm not sure, but I think because of my voice is loud. And as I have told you, I'll continue raise my voice loud. But I found out that it is not only me. It is the story of 1.8 million. 95% of Gaza population are denied permit through the Israel outside Gaza. I feel like a little bird trying hard to live out its cage, and frustration. I feel frustrated, I feel angry, I feel why? Just big why? Why this is happening to the civilians of Gaza Strip?
On the other side of the border, everything is seen through the prism of the threat posed to Israel, including attacks on UN schools. Last week, the UN dismissed Israeli claims that Hamas rockets were found in schools used as shelters, but admitted rockets were found in empty schools.
Hamas, during the operation and during the last few operations, constantly, instead of defending his people, just used his people as human shields. Sometimes even with those people not even know that they're being used as a human shield as things happened. And while our homes are being targeted by Hamas missiles from UN school, we tell civilians nearby to stay away from those targets, but we're not going to allow Hamas to shoot from civilian targets.
Major, during military operations, there obviously were a large number of civilian casualties. How do you respond to that?
During wars, civilians sometimes can get hit. We don't do that on purpose. We do our best in order to avoid from that. And if Hamas decides to use his civilians as human shields, we can do our best in order to avoid that, but our lives matter.
So we are standing inside Kibbutz Nahal Oz, which is located 700 meters from the fence, from the Gaza Strip. In front of
Kibbutz Nahal Oz is less than a kilometre from Gaza. The night before we arrived, a rocket fired from Gaza landed here.
As you know, yesterday we had a bomb in Israel, so today it's a bit of a tension day. We heard some noises during the day today.
Last summer, a 3-year-old boy lost his life here in a rocket attack. It has cast a deep shadow for the remaining families.
The thing that impacted us the most was the death of Daniel Triggerman this summer during Tzuk Eitan, Protective Edge, because they did everything right. They were in their house, 3 little kids, they knew what to do, they just didn't have enough time. And Daniel got hit by a bomb that took only 3 seconds from the alert. And he didn't have enough time. So they did everything right. And the thing is, as a parent, you deal with a moral issue. Because if you don't have the power or the tools to protect your kids, so maybe you are not a good parent.
The Barneas have made the big decision to leave their kibbutz.
Because we can't see any optimistic future in the situation in the nearest future. That's, I think, the most... And even yesterday, where the bomb fell, it's the kind of proof that it's going to be again. And there's nothing changed in the reality. The threats are all the same. The tunnels, the bombing, the alert time. Everything remains the same.
That deep sense of hopelessness is echoed back in Gaza. Here, the bleakness of loss is impossible to escape. Abu Ahmed al-Batash lost his wife and 17 members of his extended family in one explosion, which he said struck without warning. At the height of last summer's war, the bodies, 4 of which were never found, were buried on waste ground close by.
ايش اتذكرهم هذول اولاد اخويا زي اولادي واخويا ربيته زي اولادي الثاني لانه كان اصغر واحد من اخوتي من هذا وهذول كانوا مالين علينا المنطقه كانوا يعني هم اللي كانوا محيين المنطقه كلها احنا وياهم احنا بقينا هنا هلقيت بتيجي بتلاقي فيش بتلاقي باجي من صلاه الصبح بقوا عاملين حركه في المنطقه وايش زي هيك فالانسان يعني متاثر كثير اللي سبحان الله إنه ربنا اختارهم وإحنا الحمد لله على اللي ربنا رايده.
It's against this backdrop of continuing violence and confrontational politics that children like Mara attempt to grow up. This is what remains of her home from which she and her family fled in the middle of the night last July. Like many Gazan children, she has seen the horrors of war. Psychological support has helped her readjust.
The direct impact is the children don't sleep well at night, not having nightmares, different sorts of phobias. Some of them lost speech. Some of them are afraid of dark nights or back to bedwetting again. And some cannot focus at school. They became very irritable and cannot focus at school. And this, of course, it has another effect, which is the social problems. Have restless children, querulous, aggressive children. There is no life at the moment in Gaza. You are coming as visitor, but I live here, and I go every day to the refugee camps and the areas, and I can see the frustration in people's faces and souls and minds. My concern is the youth. They may start looking for radical solutions, may start getting involved with more radical Islamist groups like ISIS.
Gaza is hemmed in by the sea and Israel. Its people are caught between dysfunctional Palestinian politics and the constant threat of war. The tide of violence breaks regularly here. Summer is coming. People fear what it may bring.
Robert Short reporting. Now, in a few minutes, polls will close in the Westminster elections and the counting of votes will start. Very shortly, we'll have details of a UK-wide exit poll, which should give some indication of whether David Cameron will be staying in number 10 Downing Street or whether Labour leader Ed Miliband will be moving in. I'm joined here in studio by our political correspondent Katie Hannon, and from London by journalist and commentator Lance Price, a former advisor to Tony Blair. Lance, if I could come to you first, as I say, we'll have those exit poll results very shortly as soon as we get them. But just a point about all the opinion polls to date would suggest that the British system is designed to produce a clear result, to produce single-party government, and it looks like, for the second time running, it's going to fail to do that.
Yes, it looks almost certain that we're heading for another hung parliament with neither David Cameron's Conservatives nor Ed Miliband's Labour Party able to form a government on their own. I think that's the only certainty we have going into this election. Who will come out with the largest number of seats? We really can't tell, certainly not from the opinion polls. The exit poll may tell us a bit more of that in just a few minutes' time. And then we'll be looking at how the smaller parties do and what kind of coalition might be possible.
OK, there's been a lot of focus on the leadership of Ed Miliband throughout the campaign. Now, judging from what we can see on this side of the water, he does seem to have made more of an impact, perhaps, than had been expected. Do you think his leadership has been a problem, or do you think something else has led to Labour failing to capitalise on the government's unpopularity?
Well, I think for a long time Ed Miliband was underperforming and there were question marks about his style of leadership, about his strategy, about the way he was trying to take on David Cameron. He had high points. He would make a terrific speech at a party conference, perhaps, or elsewhere, a big intervention politically, and then it would all seem to fade away and there would be no follow-through. But having said that, he's fought a very, very good election campaign. He came in with his personality, having been ridiculed by the press a lot and the media, and certainly by the Conservative Party, and he showed himself to be a man of much greater stature than a lot of people gave him credit for. So, win or lose, Ed Miliband's had a very good campaign.
OK, Katie, if I could turn to you, apart from the fact that we like elections and we like horse races and we like watching them, why should people in Ireland be interested or concerned about what happens in this election?
Well, I think we should care a great deal about what happens in this election because it could have a major significant bearing on our economic recovery, because David Cameron has, of course, promised that if he is re-elected, that he will renegotiate the UK's relationship with Brussels and that there will be a referendum on exiting the EU before the end of 2017. And that, of course, could have catastrophic consequences for us. We are the nearest neighbour, we have a huge trading relationship. We would undoubtedly be the country that would be hardest hit in those circumstances. And then there is the DUP factor. there is a possibility, it's not seen as the most likely possibility, but it exists, that the DUP could hold the balance of power or be in a position to exercise some power in that regard. And this would come at a very delicate time in the Northern Ireland politics. Stormont deadlocked at the moment on welfare reform. The DUP have made it clear that they will be demanding things such as flags and emblems, and that I see we are now getting our first exit poll.
Well, let's take a look at that. Wow, Conservatives projected to win 316 seats in Westminster. Labour just 239. The Lib Dems 10, which is a big fall from the 56 I think they got the last time. UKIP just 2. The Scottish Nationalists 58, and others, that would include the DUP, the SDLP, Sinn Féin, the Welsh Nationalists and so on, 25 seats in Parliament. And Katie, the winning margin they need to get to is
323, and I see, looking at this, the Conservatives and the Lib Dems could do it again.
Could do it again. Lance Price, if we could bring you in on those numbers, I don't know whether you can see them, but you've certainly heard them. 316 for the Tories. Wow. More than you expected?
Surprising exit poll. I think people, judging by the opinion polls, people were expecting it to be tighter than that. I think the Labour people looking at that poll will be very disappointed and hoping that the real results turn out to be different. It certainly, on the basis of that poll, would suggest, on that exit poll, would suggest that David Cameron is likely to, almost certain to stay in Downing Street and could put together some form of coalition. Although, as you say, I mean, it'll be touch and go whether he could do it just with the Liberal Democrats, just based on those figures that we've just seen. So therefore, the DUP could play a pivotal role in keeping David Cameron in power.
Given that the opinion polls, as you say, were indicating a much tighter result all along, and assuming that this poll is as accurate as it was in the last two elections, it was very, very accurate in the last two elections, is there a case of the shy Tory not telling the pollster what they were really thinking of voting?
There's always a possibility of that, although they've done their best. They always try to take that into account when they weight the results that they take in and the answers that they are given at the polling stations when they collect all the basic figures for these exit polls. They try to factor in things like shy Tories and so on. I think even the pollsters themselves have said that this election has been the most difficult one for them to poll, including the exit poll, because of the impact of some of the smaller parties. We don't really know for certain what impact the Green vote or the UKIP vote, for example, might have in some really key marginal seats. But the gap there in those figures is quite substantial between the Conservatives and Labour. So that poll would have to be pretty seriously out for Ed Miliband to stand much of a chance of being Prime Minister.
There's been a lot of talk in the last week or so about the mechanics of how a government is formed in Britain after an election result, and there was a lot of suggestions that this could be very difficult. It doesn't look like it's going to be very difficult on that basis. If that is correct, David Cameron will get first shot at forming a government, first shot at getting a Queen's speech before Parliament.
Yeah, based on those figures, I think David Cameron will be the only person who could be possibly in a position to try to form a coalition. And it would be a question of what kind of coalition or government he was able to put together. Now, we have to stress all along, we haven't had the actual results. We've only had an exit poll. But if we're just talking about the results of that exit poll, then the leader of the largest party always gets the first chance to try to form a government. It was looking before now that perhaps David Cameron would struggle to do that, and there might actually be an anti-Tory majority in the House of Commons, even if David Cameron had the largest number of seats, if the gap between him and the Labour Party had been smaller than those figures suggest. But as things stand, simply on the basis of those figures, that seems unlikely, and it seems that perhaps David Cameron will have more of a smile on his face tonight than he's had through most of the campaign.
And perhaps that message about he was pushing in the last while that only a vote for the Tories could guarantee stability, perhaps that got through to voters.
Yes, it may well be that that was the case. I mean, I think people were expecting that as polling day got closer, and actually on the day itself, and lots of people were saying they were still undecided as they were going to the polling booths today. It may well be that that sort of really did force people to make up their minds at the very last minute which way to go, and to recognise that it really had to be a choice between Conservatives and Labour. And if those figures are right, then it was the Conservatives who benefited most from all those don't-knows making up their mind at the very last minute.
Katie, you could see Irish politics as mirroring British politics in some ways. I mean, we had Tony Blair won 3 terms, then Bertie Ahern won 3 terms, Gordon Brown took over and didn't do so well in the following election, Brian Cowan similarly. And you could argue that the Conservative Lib Dem coalition introducing austerity policies perhaps had something in common with the current government here. So do you think Enda Kenny will be pleased looking at that?
I think they might take some solace from it, although I think perhaps Labour will take less solace looking at the Lib Dem result there, which has been a very, very bad day for the Lib Dems, even going by the poor opinion poll results they were getting during the campaign. That would again bring home to Labour that it is the small party in every coalition that seems to take the blame and take the hit, and this will seem very much the ghost of Christmas future, I think, for the Labour Party.
OK. And Lance, just one last question for you. Obviously, David Cameron and Nick Clegg, they've had to bring in some pretty unpopular, unpalatable measures in terms of austerity and so on. And yet they seem to have got away, or at least the Conservatives seem to have got away with it.
Well, they fought the campaign on the basis of their economic plan having been the right one, that there had been tough medicine, but that it had done a lot to start to turn the British economy around. That's always a very powerful argument at the election time. The economy really does always turn out to be the principal issue that people vote upon. And we heard a lot about an end to austerity coming not so much from the Labour Party, because they were kind of offering austerity light, so there would still be cuts but not quite so many, but from some of the smaller parties, the Green Party, the SNP and the others, arguing for an end to austerity. And it's pretty clear that if David Cameron is back in Downing Street, that austerity is going to continue. OK,
Lance, Katie, thank you both for joining us. And let's go over to Belfast now. And Miriam.
Here in the King's Hall in Belfast, thanks David, we're going to be getting the results hopefully around 2 o'clock for the 4 main constituencies in Belfast. I'm joined here by Fionnuala O'Connor, journalist. No exit poll, of course, for Northern Ireland. What are you looking for tonight? What are the key constituencies you're going to be looking out for?
Well, there are 3. First, East Belfast, South Belfast and Fermanagh South Tyrone. And possibly South Antrim could be the surprise one. And the really strange thing would be Belfast has now become a nationalist city, a Catholic majority city. But tonight, if Unionists are lucky, we could see 2 Unionist seats become 2 Unionist seats, and a third one. So there would be 3 out of 4.
Take us through those for people who are just watching and who don't know the detail. Take us through those constituencies.
Well, East Belfast is the big one. It's the one that Peter Robinson, the DUP leader, lost to the Alliance's Naomi Long in the last election, which was a real blow to Peter Robinson, a real coup for Alliance. But since then we've had the flags debacle, which really looks very likely to take Naomi Long out of the seat again. The anger at that, which is Unionist feeling that Alliance made it possible for a nationalist mood in the council to say the flag should only be flown on a restricted number of days, the Union Jack flown over the City Hall. The other 2, South Belfast, is a possible change. That's Alistair McDonnell, the SDLP leader. But there's a Sinn Féin candidate running in South Belfast as well, Martin O'Muillior, a much stronger candidate than they've ever had there before. If they split, as we say here, the Catholic vote, the nationalist vote, which they will do in some proportions, there's a chance that the DUP's candidate, not very well known, not very popular, Jonathan Bell, will take the seat. The third one, Fermanagh South Tyrone, really close, forever a needle match. Michelle Gildernew, who on an appeal by Ulster Unionists the last time, held it by 1 vote. But she's been in situ now for some time, and Sinn Féin does not easily give up a seat that they have won. So chances are she will hang on to it. However, there's only 1 Unionist standing against her. This is because of the Unionist Pact, and it's the former Ulster Unionist leader, Tom Elliott, an Orange man. It's perhaps should be said at this point that the Unionist Pact resulted in 4 Orange men standing, as pointed out by an Alliance candidate, the Alliance candidate here in South Belfast, which sort of is a little gloss on Unionists saying it's sectarian of Sinn Féin to be calling for nationalist Catholics in North Belfast. to get together and vote for him. He's the least likely of the 4 seats to, that's the least likely of the 4 seats to change.
It's disappointing, actually, so long after the Good Friday Agreement, isn't it, that you do have the Unionists having a pact in 4 constituencies, which is viewed as quite sectarian, and then you do have North Belfast, Jerry Kelly, and those leaflets that was regarded as sectarian.
Well, disappointing. Unrealistic to expect it to be anything different. Nobody said when the Good Friday Agreement was signed that it was going to transform what was in people's hearts and minds. You can say it's a sectarian division. You could also say it's a question of political allegiance and identity. So it's really British versus Irish as well.
OK, well listen, Fionnuala, thanks very much, and we'll all be back on air here just after 11. Back to you for now, though, David.
Thanks, Miriam. And remember, as Miriam said, you can join Brian Dobson in London and Miriam and myself for a Westminster election special on this channel that starts at 11:10 and continues until 4 o'clock. Hope you can join us then. For now, though, from everyone on the team, thanks for watching and good night.
And before we begin that election special at 11:10, first on this 100-year anniversary, a unique documentary tells the story of the sinking of the Lusitania. Retold by those who survived, 18 Minutes That Changed the World is on the way after the break.